I scheduled an appointment to see a therapist. It's apparent that I need help, and I feel like if I don't get it soon, I'll explode. She asked that I not share her name, but for the sake of my story, I'll refer to her as Dr. Watterson. She's about 20 years or so older than me and has laugh lines that trace her face, giving her a somewhat motherly disposition. I'd never seen a therapist before her and was nervous about how I'd get around to what I'd been feeling over the past 5 days, but I found that as soon as I was in her office, the words just came pouring out. I told her everything, from my sleepless nights to the paranoia of the night before. It felt good to finally say it out loud, because, although I'd recorded the words, saying them to another living person felt like I was finally putting down a weight I'd been carrying on my chest. When I was finished, she looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "I don't think anything is wrong with you," she said after a moment of thought. "At least, not to the degree you're concerned about." She spoke slowly, but I still couldn't comprehend what she was saying. There was nothing wrong with me. Of course there was something wrong. Reading my expression, she continued, "Now, that's not to say that you're not justified in your concerns. Sleeplessness is something that plagues most people at some time or another, but I get the impression you're worried about something far more severe than that. Am I right?" I nodded. I'd been worrying about everything from brain tumours to alien abduction, silly as it may sound. "I believe that this sleep study you're set to participate in will give you the answers you're looking for. That being said, I do think we should address this insomnia from another angle, don't you?" I agreed. "So, let's try a few exercises at night, before going to bed, to see if you can turn your brain off. I think after a few nights of decent sleep, maybe even just one, you'll feel much better." I again agreed with her. I left her office feeling better, but not as great as I'd hoped. She gave me some advice on turning my brain off before going to sleep. Things like turning off all screens an hour before bedtime, taking a long shower, drinking a glass of water or milk. But I still wasn't completely convinced that any of this would help. It seemed too easy. I got home and carried my tired body up the stairs, fumbling for the door key. I went to slide it in the knob, but found that the key didn't want to go in. It took only a second before I realised that the doorknob had been changed. I stepped back. This wasn't even my door. This wasn't even my house. I looked around and realised I'd pulled up to a vacant house in the middle of essentially nowhere. There was a long dirt road that I surely must have driven up. The dust was still kicked up from where the tyres of my truck had just been. The house was surrounded by property, several acres, I'm sure, although I've never been good at judging that sort of thing. And down the road, maybe half a mile or so, I could see the road I must have turned off. I stumbled down the wooden porch steps, wondering vaguely why I hadn't noticed that I was at the wrong place when I first approached them, because my house doesn't have any steps leading up to the front door. Where the hell was I? I spun around madly, feeling my pulse race in my chest and wishing desperately for one of those Xanax that was sitting on the kitchen counter at home. I hurried back to the truck, breathing heavily, as if I'd just run a marathon. I told myself not to panic, but that train left the station the moment I realised that the house I was at wasn't my own. I looked around again, searching for any sort of recognisable landmark. In the distance, I saw a water tower, a red and white obelisk that looks like an alien spacecraft from the War of the Worlds, and I was able to get my bearings. Except, judging from the angle and the distance of the water tower, I had to have been at least 15 or 20 miles from my house. I'd gone the complete opposite direction when I'd left the therapist. How had I not noticed before? My head began to ache as I turned the key in the truck's ignition, worried suddenly that the engine wouldn't turn over and that I'd be trapped there in this place I didn't know. But the engine caught without a hitch, and I drove down the dirt road back towards my real house. When I finally did arrive home after what felt like an eternity, the first thing I did was another beeline for the vitamins. Obviously, I was deficient in something, right? Potassium, vitamin B, calcium. It had to be something. I took 2 this time, not caring about overworking my kidneys and liver. Evidently, I was sick, and my body needed these vitamins, or else I wouldn't be craving them, right? My hands shook, and I realised then, to no surprise, just how sweaty they were as I popped the pills into my mouth and worked to fill a glass with water from the top. The headache that started when I was pulling off of Topanga Drive, the name of the road the house was on, as told to me by the rusted street sign, had not yet abated, and so with that same glass of water, I also took a Tylenol and a few ibuprofen, as well for good measure. Dave sat in the corner of the kitchen, snorting like a hog as pugs often do, watching the whole scene with a sort of interest, just as he had during my episode the night before. I called him over and he came without question, and I patted his huge head with the palm of my hand, thankful that I at least had him to keep me company if nobody else. Eventually, I calmed down, but for anyone who's ever had a panic attack can tell you, I was completely and utterly exhausted. I spent the rest of the day in front of the TV and surfing the internet. I did my best to avoid the topic of my own health, lest I find myself in the middle of another panic attack, but eventually, I found myself searching through WebMD, trying to self-diagnose. By the end of that, I concluded I had one of several things, including but not limited to insomnia, a brain tumour, cancer of one variety or another, or a rare parasite. None of these helped my case, but curiously, I didn't find myself panicked by these things because none of them seemed to stick exactly, at least not in my mind. When I fell asleep, I was on the couch during an episode of Everybody Loves Raymond, with Dave at my side and an almost empty bag of Snyder's pretzels in my lap. I don't recall taking myself to bed, but I awoke there all the same a few hours later to another excruciating headache. My vision was blurred when I sat up and tried to make my way to the kitchen cabinet for the pain medicine. Distantly, as if my ears were filled with cotton, I could hear Dave barking. He probably needed to go out, but I couldn't handle that right now. My vision got blurrier and began to fade in and out, as if a light were dimming and brightening in my mind. I approached the kitchen, and just as I reached up for the painkillers, thinking perhaps I should take more vitamins as well while I'm at it, the lights completely shut off, and the last sensation I had was of falling, except, thankfully, I think I was out by then, because I don't recall the pain of hitting the floor. I awoke on my kitchen floor, completely naked. My boxers and pyjama pants were balled up in the corner, and my head pounded. I sat up gingerly, probing around my head for any injury I may have gotten from the fall. When I was satisfied that I hadn't cracked my skull, I slowly moved to my feet. A small smear of blood covered a few tiles on my kitchen floor. My hand went up to my face, and I felt a sticky wetness on my upper lip. I pulled my finger back, knowing already that I'd see the traces of drying blood on my fingertips. I went to the bathroom, trying not to bother my aching head with every step I took, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was a shadow of the man I was a week ago. My eyes were heavy and bloodshot, and the blood smeared under my nose didn't help the utterly pathetic image that stared back at me in the mirror. I wanted sleep. I needed sleep. I washed the blood off my face and shuffled back to my bed, hoping that I could sleep off whatever ailment I had.